Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Monday, September the 14th, 2020. On this episode of the Politicrat, what Joe Biden must do and do now to make sure that the Latinx community votes and votes robustly for Joe Biden. Welcome back. There is no mystery here. On this episode, there simply is no mystery. The reports are out and the reports are clear. And we are now at 50 days of voting remaining. 50 days of voting left until we get to election night. 50 days. Early voting has started already in North Carolina. It will be officially beginning in Georgia tomorrow. And later on this week, you will be starting to see other states early vote. And those will be states that include Vermont and also include Minnesota and also include Virginia, among others. But I want to turn my attention on this episode to Alabama and Doug Jones. And by extension, I want to turn my attention to Joe Biden and what he must do, what his campaign must do right now in order to bring Latinx voters not only to the dance, but into the voting booth for him. I'm not a big fan of polls, I think, as you know. And I am not someone who pays attention to polls at all. I really don't. I think it is very important to ignore polls. And I think it is very important that voters do two things right now. Make sure they are registered to vote. And second of all, vote early. Those are the only two things right now. And maybe a third thing is make sure you recruit other voters to vote early as well. And make sure that they are registered. Keep reminding them. Call your cousins, text your nephews, nieces, aunts, uncles, you name it. Do it. So those are the things that voters should be doing right now. What the Joe Biden campaign should be doing right now is investing much more of its time going after a voting bloc that is the second or third largest voting bloc in the country. And I am referring to the Latinx community. It is a diverse community. It is a thriving community. It is a growing community. And of all the communities in the United States, it is the largest voting bloc among so-called minorities. In fact, in California here, the Latinx community is the majority. And soon, within the next 15 to 20 years or so, the Latinx community will be the majority of the United States. With that said and understood, the Joe Biden campaign right now must start aggressively targeting Latinx voters. I don't care what the polls say about the fact that he has not done that, and it shows that he hasn't. The head of People for the American Way, Ben Jealous, who was formerly the head of the NAACP, last month in an interview with Wolf Blitzer, expressed concern that the Biden campaign was not going after the Latinx community as aggressively as it should. And he cited statistics that showed that Donald Trump's campaign was outspending Joe Biden by 10-1 in Latinx markets. That is not good news at all. And I do not think that the Joe Biden campaign can afford to be so cavalier. What I have also noticed is that some of Joe Biden's surrogates over the last few weeks, be it Valerie Jarrett, be it Tom Perez as well, actually, as recently as just last week, last Friday, seem to have the same cavalier attitude. Valerie Jarrett had said on CNN just last month that we are, quote, confident that the Latino community will come to us and vote for Joe Biden when the election rolls around. Just last Friday, Tom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, which is the heartbeat of the operations of the Democratic Party, got on Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC and said that he has every confidence that the Latinx community will be voting for Joe Biden. And he said because, quote, the Latinx community is about family and faith. He added that they're not going to vote for someone who threw paper towels at them in Puerto Rico, whose response to Hurricane Maria was appalling, who had called them rapists and murderers, whose policies have led to them being separated from their families. Whose behaviors towards the Latinx community have been insulting in general and specific, on top of everything else. There really is no way, Tom Perez says, that the Latinx community would want to entertain, and I'm paraphrasing this part, voting for Donald Trump. For me, it is this kind of cavalier attitude that gets the Democratic Party in trouble year after year after year. If the truth be told, the Democratic Party for several years now, make that 40, make that 50, have, for the most part, taken Black and Latinx voters for granted. And also some poor white voters as well, but mostly and vastly Black voters, specifically Black voters and now Latinx voters as well, for granted. And Tom Perez and Valerie Jarrett really should start to rethink their posture, and not just the two of them. Joe Biden's campaign must start to rethink its posture and do it now, with 50 voting days left in this election campaign. What I think Joe Biden should start to do is employ the strategy that Doug Jones employed in 2017. Doug Jones is a white male senator in Alabama. But in 2017, he was running for Senate in Alabama as a Democrat up against Roy Moore, the Republican who, of course, had been embroiled in a child molestation accusation that had actually been going on for years past. And numerous women had come up and come forward and spoken up about not Doug Jones. Numerous women had come forward and spoken up about Roy Moore, who was in his late 20s or early 30s when he was allegedly molesting underage girls. I mean, he was molesting girls, according to the women who were saying this. And Doug Jones, the Democratic challenger in this special election, and Roy Moore, who also was challenging as the Republican, were trying to fight for this Senate seat in 2017 down in Alabama, a place that had not elected a Democratic senator since the late 80s, early 1990s, with Howard Heflin, I believe. The strategy that the Doug Jones campaign used was very effective. It started at first to go after white suburban voters, and it ended up toward the end, and they were trying to appeal to the moral center of these voters. That's what the Doug Jones campaign was doing. So it spent the bulk of its time, at least the first few weeks, talking to white voters in the suburbs in Alabama and in various other places, and to the evangelical set, and convince them that Roy Jones was a man of low moral character, and you could not credibly vote for him. You couldn't do that and send a man of low moral character and criminal, quite frankly, allegedly criminal character, because those were the allegations. You could not send that kind of person to the Senate. Then I'm going to read to you next what the Doug Jones campaign did after that. And this is what they did in response to some concerns. This is from Pima Levy in Mother Jones magazine from December the 13th, 2017. The title, How Black Voters Sent Doug Jones to the Senate. In the final weeks of the campaign, Democratic strategists and activists worried that black voters would not vote in high enough numbers to help Jones win. The 25% figure was thrown around a lot. The idea that African Americans needed to make up at least 25% of the electorate, with white voters, including some crossover conservatives, supplying the rest of the vote for Jones. If black voters made up 28% as they had when President Barack Obama was on the ticket, then Jones would be in even better shape. But when the exit polls came in Tuesday night, they reported an electorate that was 30% African American, a number consultants have not even considered a possibility. As the precinct results began to roll in from Alabama's urban centers and rural majority black counties, it began to look like voters would indeed carry the day for Jones. In the end, African Americans made up a larger percentage of the vote than their share of Alabama's population, about 26%, even though they tend to be more affected than white Alabamians by the state's voting restrictions, particularly permanent felon disenfranchisement and voter ID requirements. Few thought this kind of turnout was possible in the weeks before the election, when the prevailing notion was that black voters were not energized and that the Jones campaign was not paying enough attention to them. A combination of Democratic energy, new resources from African American groups, and the last-minute turnaround by the Jones campaign appear to have made the difference. Jones' campaign spent months doing outreach to white conservative voters, largely suburban women, in an effort to convince them to abandon the Republican Party. Ad after ad focused on wooing these voters, portraying Moore as unsupportable. This was at the expense of ads that would have appealed to black voters by focusing on issues like education, healthcare, and criminal justice that feel urgent to many African Americans. But in the final weeks, the Jones campaign began to turn to exactly these kinds of appeals. Ads about healthcare ran on black radio stations. In the last week of the race, Jones barnstormed the state, paying special attention to African American communities in Birmingham, Selma, and rural areas. He brought with him prominent black politicians, including Senator Cory Booker and Representative John Lewis. Meanwhile, Moore did little to gin up energy among his base, disappearing from the campaign trail to travel out of state during the final days of the race. Now that is from Mother Jones. It is called How Black Voters Sent Doug Jones to the Senate. Pima Levy is the writer and reporter of that story. And I will have a link to that and put that in the liner notes of this episode. Joe Biden needs to follow the Doug Jones model. I get it. Alabama is just one state. I get it. It was in 2017. I get it. This was an election for Senate. I get it. This was a special election. But Joe Biden and his campaign in particular, the strategists in his campaign, that brain trust, must now focus on Latinx voters and must now make open appeals to them and must go to them. Joe Biden himself must go to the Latinx community. Joe Biden himself must appear with the Latinx community. Joe Biden must make appeals to them for their vote. He must start to talk to them about the issues that matter to them. There are 50 days left of voting in this election season. 50 days. And what I think that Joe Biden must do is now look at the second or third largest voting bloc in this country and start to speak to them, talk to them, listen to them, and articulate what he is going to do for them. Joe Biden must do this now. This is really serious because you still have a percentage of Latinx voters who are going to be voting for Donald Trump. Because you have Donald Trump holding indoor rallies like he did last night in Henderson, Nevada. The state of Nevada has a substantial Latinx population. The state of Nevada in the Democratic primary this year went to Bernie Sanders. Chuck Rocha, who is a specialist and a strategist at getting the Latinx vote out, was instrumental in getting the Latinx vote out for Bernie Sanders just a few months ago in the primary in Nevada. overwhelmingly. He got something like 78%, Bernie Sanders did, of the Latinx vote. And it would be foolhardy of Joe Biden and his campaign to fail to employ the strategy that Chuck Roker has implemented for Bernie Sanders earlier this year. And it would be as foolhardy for the Joe Biden campaign to fail to employ the strategy of Doug Jones' campaign. Joe Biden's campaign has a real opportunity now to do for themselves with Latinx voters what Doug Jones did for himself with black voters. And I would urge anybody who is listening to this, who has connections to Joe Biden's campaign, who has connections to Joe Biden, or anybody who may be working for Joe Biden who's listening to this, to please communicate this message. Joe Biden must start aggressively going after Latinx voters. Joe Biden must do this today. Joe, you are sitting on a gold mine. Latinx voters are waiting. They're waiting to be wooed. They're waiting. They want to vote. Some of them will vote. But Joe, you've got to go after these voters. You've got to go to where they are. You've got to show them that you care. You've got to speak to them. Listen to them. The old Democratic position of, well, we're confident they're going to come to us when the election comes is not going to work anymore. Tom Perez sits there and says, well, we're not going to take anybody for granted. Well, why don't you show us that, Joe Biden? Do not take the Latinx community for granted. Just because you're going after them hard in Florida, that doesn't mean that you don't go hard for them anywhere else. And I'm not suggesting that you aren't, but I am saying that now is the time. Do not leave this to the final week of the campaign, like Hillary Clinton did when she was going to Michigan with a few days to go and never set foot in Wisconsin during the general, and then had a rally in Pennsylvania the day before the election and was in Pennsylvania maybe 2 days before that. That is not going to get you any kind of victory. You have to come after these communities right now, in the cold light of day, not in some drive-by rally. That is not going to get it done. Do not throw bones to us. Do not throw bones to the very communities that could be the difference for you this time. The Democratic Party must learn its lesson from 2016. And the ground game is going to be critical. And while I have every confidence that Joe Biden will win this election, my issue is how big is he going to win this election by? Because failure to tap in to the Latinx community could be the difference between a month or two of litigation and a landslide victory. That is the difference. And if Joe Biden's team and his campaign does not want to go through weeks and weeks and weeks of litigation, and they probably will with the Donald Trump campaign anyway, but if they don't want to go through that extended headache and put the country through that, I mean, Donald Trump would be doing that. But if Joe Biden's team doesn't really want to get embroiled in that, then you can do something right now that will make this a whole lot easier. Make sure you go hard to the Latinx communities across this country, especially in the states that you're targeting, but all across this country. And I guarantee you, if you do, not only will you have the Latinx communities around this country go to the polls in droves, they will go early. And this election is all about early voting turnout, especially. You will have your landslide, Joe. You will have your landslide.
Big breaking news story out of Alabama tonight. It was a very close race, but Democrat Doug Jones is the projected winner in the special election for U.S. Senate.
It is hard to recall a Senate race that was more closely watched across the country. Republican Roy Moore was the clear frontrunner until the final days of the campaign, after allegations of past sexual misconduct piled up. One woman said Moore initiated a sexual encounter with her when she was 14 and he was 32. Moore had the financial support of the Republican Party and the president in the final days of the race. Well, late tonight, he said he is not yet conceding because the results won't be certified for the next couple of weeks. Doug Jones, though, already gave a victory speech.
We have come so far, and the people of Alabama has spoken. They have said to each other that this, I have said from the very beginning, this campaign has never been about me. It's never been about Roy Moore. It has been about every one of you and your sons and daughters.
President Donald Trump tweeted out his congratulations to Doug Jones and said, quote, "The Republicans will have another shot at this seat in a very short period of time. It never ends."
Welcome back. That was from CBS Channel 4 Denver on December the 12th, 2017. From their 10 o'clock news, reporting on the victory of Doug Jones in the special election for the U.S. Senate in Alabama. That is the way you get a victory, and that is to go to the communities and build coalitions. That's how elections are won. And Joe Biden must do the same. And he is doing this. Look, I've got no question about his ground game. I do believe that that ground game is happening, and we have to contribute to making that happen. Our focus has to be on voting. Remember, registering to vote and being very aware of what the voting rules are, turning out people to vote. That is the key now. And I do think that there is a ground game that's very serious. But what I want from the Joe Biden campaign is a concerted effort to go after the Latinx community. That's what I want. Joe Biden has got to start doing this. And what troubles me is that Joe Biden at his the DNC rather, at their convention did not sufficiently do that, in my view. I'm sorry, having just one speaker or two speakers from the Latinx community is not going after the Latinx community. And you know who I'm referring to, the young woman who lost her father to coronavirus, who is a Trump supporter. Having that one person is not sufficient enough. You must have more. And not only that, you must start to reach out to more people in the Latinx community on a larger level. Not just on immigration, but on all the other everyday issues that matter to the Latinx community. Coalitions win elections. President Obama understood this. in his second term and in his first term. He understood that. His strategists understood that. President Obama won Florida, for goodness sake. He won Florida. And he did that by targeting the Latinx community. He did that by talking to them. Si se puede. President Obama, Barack Obama, went after that community. Joe Biden needs to do the same. Joe Biden needs to do the same. And what I would also like Joe Biden to do is to stop going solely after the white working class. Hillary Clinton did not do much to go after the white working class, even though many of the white working class voted for her. But we all know that white voters traditionally split their vote between both parties almost evenly. And we also know that the majority of white people have not voted for a Democrat to the White House since 1992. It's almost 30 years ago now. It's almost 30 years ago. So with that in mind, I do not know why Joe Biden is charging after the white working class so assiduously, so passionately. I am not saying he shouldn't go after them. He should go after the white working class. But what I am saying is that he should also be going after the Latinx community. Stop going after communities that split their vote. Stop going after communities that are splitting their vote or likely to split their vote. While the Latinx community is certainly not a monolith, the Latinx community is waiting to be tapped into. There is a gold mine there. You have to understand, Joe Biden folk who run his campaign, that this is the community that is going to not only assure you and ensure you an election victory. This is the community that is going to give you a landslide victory. And in this day and age, this election cannot be close. Joe Biden cannot be winning the Electoral College 277 to 260 or whatever I know it's 538 is the total number of electoral votes. So my math may be a little off, but my point is that Joe Biden cannot be winning the Electoral College 273 to 260 or something, or 268. You cannot have that. 4 years of this hell that we've been living through in the United States, only for Joe Biden to squeak through. And then we're going to be sitting here for 6-7 weeks of legal challenges and all of that, like Al Gore and George W. Bush. Really? Joe, you can put all of that to bed. Not that there won't be legal challenges anyway, but you can put a lot of that to rest. You can put a stop to all that right now by starting to target the Latinx community aggressively. Please, these 50 days must be used wisely. I really do recommend right now that you go full bore after the Latinx community. You have got to bring the Latinx community out to vote. Turn out, turn out, turn out. You have got to bring them out to vote. And the way you do that is go to them where they are. Speak to their issues. Tell them what you are going to be doing for them. Let them know that they are valued and that you hear them and that you will work with them and work hard for them. These are the keys. And Joe Biden's people know this. And Joe Biden's people, in knowing this, must step up, get off their backsides, and start to aggressively spend money targeting the Latinx communities in this country. They are your present and they are the future. And they are now. And if you do not do this, we are going to be sitting here on November 3rd and 4th and 5th squirming. We cannot afford to shoot ourselves in the foot again. The Democratic Party has shot itself in the foot so many times that I am surprised they even have toes left. Now is the time to get real and get to targeting the second or third largest voting bloc in the United States. And that's the Latinx community. Because one thing is for sure, Donald Trump is certainly targeting his base. He is aggressively hitting at his base. He's shoring them up. He's going to states with large Latinx populations. He's outspending Joe Biden 10-1 in Latinx markets, according to the statistics that have been cited by people like Ben Jealous. He is doing the work that you have to do. Joe Biden can't just rely on surrogates to do his work. And while I know he will be campaigning in Florida and elsewhere, he's got to get a move on that right now. And he's got to target the Latinx community with ads, with appearances. And look, here's one last thing I want to say to the Biden campaign. Putting out plans on Twitter is one thing. Putting out plans on a website is one thing. But I guarantee you, the vast majority of people do not read what is on a website, especially when it comes to campaign policies. And I'm guaranteeing you, I don't care whether you have it in English or in Spanish or in another language. Most voters, be they Latinx voters or English-speaking voters, Latinx voters obviously can also speak English, but most of these voters of any group are not spending 15 minutes reading a website for policy principles. They simply do not have the time to do that. So I don't care how many plans you put out, and they're good ones because I've actually read some of them. I don't care how many plans you put out. You've got to go out there yourself, Joe. And you've got to meet the Latinx communities where they are. Believe me, Doug Jones knew that when he was running for Senate in 2017 in the special election. He obviously is doing the very same thing this time around, and I wish Doug Jones the very best. We must support Doug Jones down in Alabama. For those of you who are down in Alabama listening, please support Doug Jones for re-election to the Senate. He continues to show up on black radio stations. He continues to be a guest in black communities' radio stations. He appeared on Joe Madison's show, and he's done that many times. Joe Biden must do the same. Doug Jones understands, he gets it. He understands the value of a winning coalition. Joe Biden must now do the same. Do not rest on your laurels. Do not think that just because Trump is such a horror, that is alone going to take care of itself. Do not listen to the sound of your own polls that show you in front. The work begins now. Please, you have a large voting bloc just waiting for you to come to it. So do so, and do it right now. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.